My granddaughter's hand was trembling when she slipped the folded note into my palm under the heavy white tablecloth. The linen was so stiff it felt like paper, and for a moment the small creased square of notebook paper felt like a part of it, something that might simply dissolve. But it didn't. It was warm from her nervous grip. My son, Mark, was laughing, a loud artificial sound that bounced off the restaurant's high ceilings, trying to impress the man Candace had called their new investor. A cold knot formed behind my sternum, heavy and unmoving. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 78 years old, and in that opulent, noisy room, I was about to learn the price of my own obsolescence. If they only knew what they were about to throw away. To understand why a simple folded note could feel like a shard of glass in my hand, you need to know who I really am, or rather, who my husband Robert was. And to understand Robert, you had to understand his hands. They were a professor's hands, accustomed to the dry whisper of old paper, but the knuckles were thick, like a farmer's. There was always, if you looked closely, a faint dusting of chalk embedded in the cuffs of his corduroy jackets. A ghost of the classroom. He taught history at the university for 42 years. He spoke of empires and revolutions in a calm, steady voice that made you believe he had been there to witness them. We lived in the same modest house for 50 of our 52 years together, a two-story brick colonial where the porch steps had been repaired so many times each one was a different shade of weathered wood. It was a house of comfortable silence, filled with the scent of old books and my lemon polish. Robert had a hobby, that's what he called it. Other men had golf or fishing. Robert had the stock market. He never called it investing. That sounded too grand, too vulgar. He called it gardening. He'd sit at his heavy oak desk in the evenings, surrounded by stacks of obscure financial journals from Germany and Japan, publications that looked more like academic papers than anything you'd find in a newsstand. In the 80s, he had a telex machine installed in his study, a clattering, churning beast that spat out stock quotes on long ribbons of paper. It was the only ostentatious thing he ever owned, and it was hidden away where no one could see it. You plant seeds, Eleanor, he'd tell me, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Small seeds in overlooked soil. Then you are patient. You water them, you wait for the right season, and you don't pull them up every day to see if they've grown. Our life was his philosophy in practice. We drove the same car for a decade at a time. My winter coat was 15 years old. We took simple vacations, driving to national parks and staying in modest motels. Mark, our only child, grew up in this environment of quiet sufficiency. He had everything he needed and very little of what he wanted, a distinction Robert felt was crucial for building character. I remember one summer when Mark was 10, he desperately wanted a new bicycle, a sleek 10-speed model all his friends had. Robert took him to the garage instead. For a month, they worked together, sanding down the frame of Mark's old single-speed bike, repainting it a deep glossy blue, and replacing the chain and brakes. Robert taught him how to true the wheels with a spoke wrench. When they were done, the bike looked brand new. Mark rode it with a pride he never could have gotten from a store-bought object. He understood, for a time, the value of his own labor. Then he met Candace. She arrived in our lives like a bright, exotic bird, all sharp angles and dazzling colors. Mark was utterly bewitched. Candace came from what she vaguely described as a very difficult background, and she wore her escape from it like a medal. Wealth was not just a comfort to her, it was a creed. Her entire identity was constructed around the performance of affluence. I remember the first time Mark brought her to our home for dinner. The house smelled of the pot roast I had been slow cooking all afternoon. Candace walked into our living room, her eyes sweeping over our worn armchairs and Robert's towering shelves of books. Her smile was brilliant, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Eleanor," she'd said, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. "Your home is so authentic. It's just wonderful how you've never felt the need to follow trends." There it was, the first of 1,000 cuts. A compliment shaped like a kindness but functioning as a scalpel, carefully separating us from her world of gleaming surfaces and perpetual upgrades. Robert, who was preternaturally attuned to insincerity, simply nodded and said, "We like our things to have memories, Candace." He then turned the conversation to medieval siege weaponry, a topic so arcane it left her utterly silent. But Mark didn't see it. He saw a sophisticated, ambitious woman who would pull him up from the comfortable, stagnant world he now seemed to resent. Their wedding was the first major expense. Candace wanted a grand affair at a historic hotel downtown, something she'd seen in a magazine. Mark came to us, his face a mixture of shame and desperate hope. It's what she's always dreamed of, he'd stammered. Robert and I talked it over that night in the quiet of our bedroom. Our savings were for retirement, for emergencies. "A wedding is a party, Eleanor," Robert said, looking out at the old oak tree in our backyard. "A marriage is the work that comes after. I fear the boy is confusing the two." But he saw the look on my face. Mark was our son. In the end, we withdrew $20,000. It was a significant portion of our liquid savings, the money I mentally earmarked as the what if fund. What if the roof finally gives? What if one of us gets sick? We gave it to them. At the wedding, Candace, in a dress that cost more than our car, hugged me and whispered, "Thank you. Now we can finally start our lives properly." That was the beginning of the ledger I never wrote down but kept perfectly in my head. The next entry was 5 years later. They wanted a down payment for a house in a new, fashionable suburb. The houses were large, with two-story foyers and kitchens gleaming with stainless steel. Our son, who now worked in middle management at a marketing firm, couldn't possibly afford it. Candace was pregnant with Lily. "It's for the baby, Mom," Mark had said, his voice earnest over the phone. "We need good schools, a safe neighborhood, a yard for her to play in." Candace's reasoning was different. When she came over, she spoke of property values, of social circles, of the importance of living among the right kind of people. She patted her swelling belly as if the child within was a strategic asset. "We can't raise a child in some cramped apartment," she'd said, glancing around our perfectly adequate living room as if it were a shoebox. "It wouldn't be fair to her." Robert was more resistant this time. "They are living beyond their means, Eleanor. Giving them this money is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it." He was right, of course. But then I would look at the photo on the mantelpiece of Mark as a little boy, with a gap-toothed grin and scraped knees. The love a mother has for her child is a stubborn, irrational thing. It believes in the person they could be, long after the person they are has disappointed you. We gave them $75,000. Robert sold a block of shares in a company called Intel, something he'd bought in the early 80s. "The garden is for harvesting when there's a famine," he said grimly as he signed the papers. I felt a pang of guilt, as if we were selling off a piece of our future security. The ledger grew. $10,000 for a new car when Candace's starter luxury SUV was no longer impressive enough. $15,000 to cover credit card debt after a trip to Italy that was documented with relentless perfection on social media. $50,000, a loan they never repaid, for Mark to start a consulting business from their spare bedroom. Each request was framed as an emergency, a last resort, an investment in their future, in our granddaughter's future. And each time Candace's condescension grew in proportion to her dependency. She would visit our home and bring us gifts, always something ostentatiously expensive and utterly useless to us. A crystal vase for our simple wildflowers. A cashmere throw for a chair Robert had sat in for 30 years. "You two just never treat yourselves," she'd say, the unspoken accusation being that we didn't know how. Her compliments became more pointed. "Eleanor, you are so wonderfully unconcerned with fashion. It must be so freeing." Or, "All jobs are dignified, of course," she'd said once of Robert's professorship. "But the world does run on business, doesn't it? Robert passed away 2 years ago. It was sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. One night he was beside me, his breathing a familiar, gentle rhythm, and the next morning there was only silence. The silence he left behind was immense, a physical presence in the house. In his last few weeks, he'd seemed preoccupied. He spent more time than usual in his study. The night before he died, he took my hand. His skin felt like dry paper. Eleanor, he'd said, his voice quiet but clear, everything in the garden is for you. Remember that. There's a box for a very rainy day. He squeezed my hand. Don't let anyone make you feel small in your own life. I didn't understand the urgency then. I thought it was just a husband's loving concern. I didn't know it was a warning. After the funeral, Mark and Candace's behavior shifted. Their gentle wheedling became a more insistent pressure. My grief was an inconvenience, a delay in their plans. They began talking about my house. It's too big for you, Mom, Mark would say, his eyes avoiding mine. All these stairs, the upkeep must be a fortune. We worry about you here all alone, Candace would add, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. We found the most wonderful new retirement community. It's more like a resort, really. They have water aerobics. They had a plan. They wanted me to sell the house, the repository of my entire married life, the only home my son had ever known. They presented it as a brilliant financial strategy. I would sell the house, give them the bulk of the equity for a major new business investment, and move into a small, manageable apartment with the remainder. This is it, Mom, Mark said, his eyes shining with a feverish light I hadn't seen since he was a boy describing a new toy. This is the deal that sets us up for life, for Lily's life. We'll be able to pay you back tenfold. Candace produced glossy brochures for their new venture, a boutique marketing firm. There were charts and projections, all smoke and mirrors. But the real sales pitch was the emotional one. Think of it, Eleanor, she said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. You'll be freeing yourself from this burden, and you'll be building a legacy for your granddaughter. The total amount I had given them over the years, not including the countless small checks for birthdays and holidays, was $170,000. Selling the house would add another $400,000 to that number. The weight of it all settled in my chest. This was the culmination of Robert's garden, the final harvest. I felt a deep, weary sadness. I looked at my son, and I saw a stranger, a man whose ambition had consumed the boy I raised. But Lily, they used my love for my granddaughter as a key to unlock my life savings. I agreed. I signed the papers. I let them hire the real estate agent. I packed my life into boxes, each one a fresh bereavement. The sound of the packing tape being pulled from the roll was a screech of protest in the quiet house. I was giving them everything I had left. It was, I told myself, the last great act of a mother's love. Which brings me back to the restaurant. The dinner was meant to be a celebration. The house had sold. The check was in an escrow account, waiting to be transferred. Mark and Candace were giddy with success. Candace wore a shimmering backless gown of silver sequins that caught the light whenever she moved. She was holding court, telling a story to the investor, a man with a tan and teeth so white they looked like porcelain. The air smelled of money, of expensive perfume and seared steak. I felt like a ghost at their feast, a relic from a past they were eager to shed. I wore a simple charcoal gray sheath dress I had owned for years, and carried my old canvas tote with a faded museum logo from a trip Robert and I took the year Mark was born. Candace had eyed it with a familiar pity when I arrived. Lily, tell Grandma about your new school, Mark said, turning to his daughter. Lily, my lovely, quiet Lily, who had her grandfather's thoughtful eyes, looked down at her plate. It's fine, she mumbled. She had been silent all evening, picking at her food. There were dark circles under her eyes. Fine? It's the best private school in the state, Candace trilled. The admissions process was a nightmare, but we pulled it off. She winked at the investor. It was then, as Mark launched into another story about their brilliant business plan, that Lily reached under the table. Her small, warm hand found mine, and she pressed the folded note into my palm. I looked at her. Her eyes were wide, pleading. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away before her mother could see. My fingers, clumsy with age, fumbled with the note in my lap. The paper was from a school notebook, the blue lines faint. The writing was a teenager's hurried script, round and a little shaky. I unfolded it. There were only a few sentences. Grandma, they're lying. There's no business. They're buying a new house in the Barrington Estates. I heard them talking. They found a place for you. It's called the Golden Years Residence. I looked it up. It's a state home. I'm so sorry. I love you. The words on the page blurred. The sound of the restaurant, the clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversation, my own son's booming laugh, faded into a dull roar, like the sound of the ocean heard from a great distance. A coldness started in my chest and radiated outwards, down my arms into my fingertips, which went numb where they gripped the note. I felt the weight of the lie, not as an emotional blow, but as a physical pressure, as if the air in the room had suddenly become heavy and thick, making it impossible to breathe. I looked across the table at my son, his face flushed with wine and triumph, and I saw him for what he was, not my child, but a smiling thief who had just stolen the last 50 years of my life. The drive home was a blur. Mark and Candace were too absorbed in their victory to notice my silence. Candace was scrolling through a real estate website on her phone, showing Mark pictures of a cavernous white kitchen. And the master closet, Mark. It's bigger than your mother's entire living room, she exclaimed, a high, girlish giggle escaping her lips. The sound was obscene. I sat in the back seat, the note a tiny, hot coal in my fist. I watched the city lights smear across the window. Robert's words echoed in my mind for a very rainy day. Don't let anyone make you feel small in your own life. The rain had come. It was a deluge. When I got back to my house, the house that was no longer mine, the familiar scent of lemon and old paper felt like an accusation. The boxes stood in silent stacks, monuments to my foolishness. I walked into Robert's study, the one room I hadn't yet packed. It was just as he'd left it. His heavy oak desk, his leather chair with the worn impression of his body still in it. And on the corner of the desk, a small, ugly stone gargoyle he'd picked up at a flea market in France. He called it the Guardian of Secrets. My eyes fell on the bottom right-hand drawer of his desk. It was locked. It had always been locked. Robert was a man of immense privacy, and I had respected it. But now his words guided me. I went to the bookshelf to his worn copy of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Tucked inside the back cover was a small, ornate brass key. My hand trembled as I fitted it into the lock. It turned with a soft, definitive click. Inside the drawer was a single heavy, black leather ledger, and on top of it, a thick manila envelope with my name, Eleanor, written in Robert's neat academic hand. I opened the envelope first. It contained a letter and a business card. The card was simple, embossed with black lettering, Davies and Finch, Estate Law. Mr. Alastair Davies. Beneath it, a phone number. The letter was brief. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the rain has come. I am sorry I am not there to hold the umbrella. Forgive my secrecy, but I never wanted this to change us. Wealth is a tool, not an identity. I feared it would become a burden to you, or worse, a target for others. Mr. Davies has managed my garden for 30 years. He is a good man. He holds the maps to everything I planted. Use them to build a fortress or a new garden of your own. Live your life with the peace and security you so richly deserve. Don't let anyone, not even our own blood, take that from you. My love, always. Robert. Tears streamed down my face, not from sadness, but from a profound, anchoring love. He had seen this coming. He had known the weakness in his own son, the rapacious hunger in his son's wife. He had built a fortress for me, stone by quiet stone, over 40 years. With a deep breath, I opened the black ledger. The first page was a summary. It was a list of holding companies, trusts, and brokerage accounts. My eyes scanned the columns of numbers, but they didn't make sense. The figures were too large, filled with too many commas. I turned the page, and another, and another. There were property deeds, dozens of them. Commercial buildings in the city, apartment complexes in 3 different states, undeveloped land in the path of future growth. There were stock portfolios filled with names I'd only vaguely heard of: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, purchased decades ago. My quiet, frugal history professor, my husband, who wore corduroy jackets with patched elbows, had not been gardening. He had been building an empire. I sat at his desk for hours, the ledger open before me, the gargoyle standing guard. The numbers swam before my eyes until they resolved into a single, staggering truth. The $400,000 from the sale of my home, the sum that Mark and Candace believed was my entire net worth, the sum for which they were willing to discard me, was, to the estate Robert had left me, nothing more than a rounding error, a speck of dust. The coldness in my chest did not thaw. Instead, it solidified. It hardened from a knot of grief into a core of pure, cold clarity. The woman who had packed those boxes, the sentimental fool who had wept over old photographs, was gone. The woman who sat in Robert's chair now was someone else entirely. She was the sole executor of the Vance estate, and she had work to do. The next morning at precisely 9 o'clock, I called Mr. Davies. His office smelled of old leather, strong coffee, and the quiet authority of generational wealth. Mr. Alistair Davies was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that were both kind and shrewd. He rose from behind a mahogany desk large enough to land a small aircraft on. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a warm baritone, "I have been waiting for your call for 2 years. I am only sorry for the circumstances that must have prompted it." He didn't pry. He simply listened. I told him everything, my voice calm and even, devoid of the hysteria I had felt the night before. I told him about the house, the business investment, the note from my granddaughter, and the brochure for the Golden Years residence that I had found on Mark's computer a few days prior, a fact I had pushed away as a misunderstanding. I laid it all out, the years of financial drains, the emotional manipulation, the final, brutal betrayal. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingertips steepled together. He looked at me with a profound respect that was almost startling. "Robert used to say, 'The quietest men build the strongest walls,'" he said softly. "I see now he was building them for you." He shared a brief story about how Robert, in the middle of a market crash in 1987, had called him not in a panic, but with a list of companies to buy, quoting Roman military strategy as his rationale. It was a small thing, but it made Robert feel present in the room, a silent partner in what was to come. Then he became all business. He slid a thick binder across the desk. "This is a current overview of the estate's assets, Eleanor. I am at your disposal. Tell me what you wish to do." For the next 2 hours, he walked me through the empire Robert had built. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. I, Eleanor Vance, who clipped coupons and worried about the heating bill, was the owner of a portfolio that could be charitably described as formidable. I owned the building where Mark's current marketing firm leased its office space. I owned a significant portion of the commercial real estate on the very block where Candace bought her designer clothes. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. "First," I said, my voice coming out differently. It was no longer the voice of a woman asking permission to exist. It was the voice of Robert's wife, the voice of a CEO. "I want you to halt the transfer of funds from the sale of my home. Immediately." "Done," Mr. Davies said, making a note. "Second, I want to know everything about the Barrington estates, specifically the property my son and his wife are attempting to purchase." His associate had the information in less than 10 minutes. The house was a sprawling 10,000 square foot monstrosity of white stucco and glass. The price was $2.3 million. They had been approved for a mortgage that was clearly beyond their means, likely based on the expected infusion of cash from my house sale. The closing was scheduled in 2 weeks. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and precise. Mr. Davies, I said, leaning forward, can you form a holding company for me? Something anonymous. Of course, by noon today. Good, I said. I want that holding company to make a cash offer on that house. I want you to offer $200,000 above their asking price. I want the sale closed by the end of next week. I want to own that house before my son ever gets to the closing table. Mr. Davies's eyebrows shot up. A slow smile spread across his face. An aggressive, decisive maneuver, Mrs. Vance. Robert would have approved. The days that followed were a blur of methodical action. I was living a double life. By day, I was on the phone with Mr. Davies and his team, moving vast sums of money, signing documents, making decisions that would have terrified me a week earlier. I was a quick study. Robert's gardening lessons had sunk in deeper than I ever knew. In the evenings, I was still the meek, grieving widow. I played my part to perfection. Mark called, his voice tight with anxiety. Mom, there's a problem with the wire transfer for the house money. The bank said it's on hold. Did you do something? Oh dear, I said, my voice quavering just so. I'm not sure. Everything is so confusing since your father passed. Let me call the bank tomorrow. The next day Candace called. Her voice was like honey laced with arsenic. Eleanor, we need that money. Our business partners are getting nervous. We have deadlines, you know. You can't just be forgetful about these things. I am so sorry, dear, I said. I'm doing my best. The best attack was a legal one. A week later, a courier delivered a thick envelope. It was a letter from a lawyer they had hired. It was full of threatening language about my fiduciary irresponsibility and hinted at filing for a conservatorship, suggesting I was no longer mentally competent to handle my own affairs. They were trying to have me declared senile so they could seize control. I faxed the letter to Mr. Davies. His response was a single calm phone call. Don't you worry, Eleanor. Their lawyer is a minnow. We are a shark. Let me handle it. He did. The next day, their lawyer formally withdrew from their case after receiving a letter from Davies and Finch. I imagine it was quite a letter. While the legal and financial gears were turning, I set about securing my own life. I hired a locksmith, a young man with kind eyes, to come to the house. He was there to change the locks, a preemptive measure. As he worked, he saw the stacks of boxes. Moving? He asked. In a way, I said. I'm moving back into my own life. He nodded, not understanding, but accepting it. Good for you, he said. Sometimes you have to change the locks just to remember who has the right to a key. His simple wisdom was more comforting than 1,000 words of sympathy. The greatest victory of that week, however, was a small one. I walked into the most expensive department store in the city, the one Candace always talked about. I felt out of place in my simple dress and worn coat. A saleswoman with a severe haircut looked me up and down with disdain. I ignored her. I walked to the high-end accessories department, and I bought a new handbag. It wasn't flashy. It was a simple, elegant leather bag, beautifully made, that cost a truly obscene amount of money. Then I went to the cashier and paid for it with a new debit card Mr. Davies had issued me. It was a heavy, black metal card linked to a private wealth account. The card made a solid, definitive sound as I placed it on the counter. The saleswoman's expression flickered. For the first time in years, I had done something purely for myself. It felt like breathing again after being underwater. The call came from Mr. Davies 2 days before their scheduled closing. We have it, Eleanor, he said. The house in Barrington Estates is now the property of the RV Holdings Corporation. Congratulations. You are their new landlord. A wave of something light and dizzying passed through me. It wasn't joy. It was the calm, quiet satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. Now all that was left was the final act. Candace called that evening, her voice saccharine sweet. Eleanor, we have the most wonderful news. We managed to sort out all the financial mess. The closing is back on for Friday. We're having a small celebratory brunch at the new house right before we sign the final papers, just with a few of our closest friends and our new partners. We want you to be the guest of honor. After all, she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, none of this would be possible without your little contribution. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. The night before the confrontation, I couldn't sleep. I found myself standing in the dark in front of the mantelpiece. I picked up the old silver frame photograph of Mark. He was 6 years old in the picture, sitting on Robert's shoulders. He had a gap-toothed, joyful smile, his small hand tangled in his father's hair. Where did that little boy go? A wave of grief washed over me, so powerful it buckled my knees. This was my son, my only child. The plan I had set in motion was a cold, intricate machine, and tomorrow it would grind him and his life to dust. Was this justice, or was it a mother's cruelest revenge? I questioned everything. Maybe I should just let them have the money, let them have the house. I could disappear, live a quiet life somewhere else. Why did I need to prove anything? The anger that had fueled me for 2 weeks suddenly felt exhausting. All I felt was a profound, bottomless sorrow for what was broken, for the family I had lost. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the picture frame. I saw a tired old woman. Robert's words came back to me. Don't let anyone make you feel small in your own life. And then I remembered Candace's voice on the phone, her condescending tone as she called my life savings a little contribution. I remembered the name of the state-run facility, the Golden Years Residence, a place where people are sent to be forgotten. They had not just asked for my money. They had asked for my silence, my invisibility, my erasure. They had not just tried to take my house. They had tried to take my dignity. My resolve hardened again, not with fire this time, but with ice. This was not about revenge. It was about reclamation. I was not destroying my son's life. I was taking back my own. I went to Robert's study and took the small stone gargoyle from his desk. I wrapped it in tissue paper and placed it in my new handbag. He would be my silent witness. I laid out my clothes for the next day, the same charcoal gray sheath dress, my armor of humility. I would not let them see a single change in me until the very last moment. The house in Barrington Estates was even more vulgar in person. It was a palace of beige stucco, with a turret and a 3-car garage. Cars I recognized, Mercedes, BMWs, a Porsche, lined the circular driveway. I arrived via a taxi, which the valet attendant eyed with thinly veiled contempt. I walked through the massive front doors into a 2-story foyer with a chandelier that looked like a frozen waterfall. The air smelled of fresh paint and catered food. About 20 people were milling about, sipping champagne from flutes. This was Candace's court. These were the people whose opinions she valued above all else. My son and his wife were holding court in the center of the cavernous living room, which was empty of furniture, making it feel like a grand, hollow ballroom. Candace, dressed in a sharp white pantsuit, spotted me. Her smile was a slash of bright red lipstick. "Eleanor, you made it," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She glided over and gave me an air kiss that didn't touch my cheek. "Everyone, this is my wonderful mother-in-law, Eleanor. She's been so incredibly generous." She said the word generous with a slight emphasis, as if it were a charming but minor character trait, like being good at knitting. She tried to steer me towards a corner. "Why don't you have a seat over here? You must be tired." She was trying to hide me, to minimize my presence, to make me an insignificant footnote in her grand narrative. "I'm fine, dear," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I did not move. Mark came over, looking nervous. He was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders. "Mom, thanks for coming." He wouldn't meet my eyes. The moment came about 30 minutes later. A man in a suit, the real estate agent, clapped his hands for attention. If I could have everyone's attention, Mark and Candace would like to say a few words before we head over to the lawyer's office to sign the final papers and get the keys. Candace took center stage, her arm linked through Mark's. She beamed at the assembled crowd. "Thank you all for being here to share this incredible day with us," she began. "Mark and I have worked so hard for this. We've taken risks, we've dreamed big, and today that dream becomes a reality. She paused for effect. We've had so much support, but I especially want to thank my mother-in-law, Eleanor. She gestured to me. All eyes turned. Her contribution from her modest savings was the little push we needed to get over the finish line. It's proof that every little bit helps. The room was filled with polite, condescending smiles. I was the quaint, simple old mother, the heartwarming backstory to their glamorous success. I let the silence settle for a moment. Then I stepped forward. My heart was not pounding. My hands were not shaking. I felt a preternatural calm. "Candace," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room's murmur. "You used the word modest. I'm curious what you consider to be a modest amount." Candace was thrown. "Well, it's not about the amount, Eleanor. It's the spirit. I'd like to know the amount," I insisted calmly. "The amount you consider to be a little push. Let's be specific. Was it the $20,000 for your wedding?" A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Mark shifted his weight. "Or perhaps," I continued, my voice steady, "the $75,000 for the down payment on your first house, the $10,000 for the car, the $50,000 business loan you never repaid, or the $400,000 from the sale of my home, the home your father and I built together over 50 years." I paused. "Let's total it up. $555,000. Is that, in your world, a little contribution?" The silence in the room was absolute. It was a thick, heavy thing pressing in on all of us. The polite smiles had vanished from the faces of their friends. Candace's face had gone pale. That's not, you're twisting things." "Am I?" I asked. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. The social worker's report Mr. Davies's investigator had acquired from the Golden Years residence. My application, filed by my son, citing my increasing confusion and inability to live alone. I didn't say what it was. I simply held it up. "Is this also a twisting of things?" Mark looked like he was going to be sick. "Mom, please." Just then the real estate agent's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his face clouding with confusion. He whispered something to Mark. I saw Mark's face drain of all color. "What is it?" Candace hissed. Mark swallowed hard. The wire for the final payment didn't go through. The bank rejected it. Insufficient funds. There it was, the ironic, beautiful timing of it all. Candace's perfectly constructed world began to crumble. Her face, a mask of confident wealth a moment ago, was now a canvas of pure panic. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a platinum credit card. "It's a mistake. Put the closing costs on this," she snapped at the agent. The agent took the card and swiped it on a small device attached to his phone. He waited. He swiped it again. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of pity and professional embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It's declined." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. In that moment, stripped of their financial performance, they had nothing. They were just two people in an empty house that wasn't theirs, exposed in front of everyone they had tried so desperately to impress. That was my cue. I walked to the ornate marble-top table that was the only piece of furniture in the room. I reached into my handbag, past the gargoyle, and took out a thick sheaf of legal documents bound in a blue cover. I placed it on the table. It made a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the silent room. "You're right about one thing, Candace," I said, my voice resonating with a calm authority I didn't know I possessed. "The wire transfer was stopped. I stopped it." I looked at my son. "And you're right, Mark. There was a mistake with the bank. The mistake was that you thought the money in my accounts was yours to take." I let my gaze sweep over the stunned faces of their friends, then land back on Candace. "You wanted this house to reflect your status, to show the world you had finally arrived. You built this dream on a foundation of lies and on the sale of my life's memories." I placed my hand on the blue-bound documents. "So I bought it for you." The confusion on Candace's face was total. What are you talking about?" This house, I said, patting the documents, I